Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
This show is brought to you by the Open to Hope Foundation in partnership with the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation. Heidi, we're going to have a wonderful show today because we're going to be talking about widows, helping widows, and if there's anything I like, it's hearing that people are helping each other in the grief community.
Absolutely, Mama. We've got some great guests today. We are going to speak with Nargi and Roselyn about the loss of their husbands, which inspired them to help widows through the W Connection. And then we're going to talk with Audrey Pellicano, who hosts the Death Café at the Open Center in New York City, and she's written a great book, which she will show us, called 6 Secrets to Surviving Widowhood.
Right, and Audrey's going to give us a few tips, which we always like to have. Well, thank you, ladies, for being on our show today. Great to have you on.
Thank you for having us.
So now, talk about the W Connection. Do you want to start for us, Bob?
So the W Connection was started in 2009. It was started out of necessity. My co-founder and I realized that there was nothing out there for widows past bereavement.
And you became a widow.
I became a widow in 2008, March of 2008. And when I became a widow...
And now, who is your husband? Tell us a little bit about him. I think we've got a picture of him.
All right. So, you know what, I always start my story in 2007. In 2007, my husband and I bought an apartment on the Upper West Side. We became pregnant. And in December, my son, William, was born. My son was born 2 months premature. And he stayed in neonatal intensive care for 1 month. In January 19th, he came out of neonatal intensive care. And my husband had been having pain throughout my entire pregnancy. And when my son finally came home and I was able to focus on my husband, I said, honey, you have to get to the doctor. Something's wrong. And when he went, we found out that he had cancer. It had already spread. And we thought they'd cure it. But he died 2 months later. My son William was 3 months old. So we're on top of the world. And then I became a new mom and a widow in March of 2008.
Wow. And then you found that there wasn't a lot of support for you?
Right. I found that there wasn't support. I got some advice early on to not go to a bereavement group until 6 months. So I followed that advice, and then for 3 months, and then I said I need something. And I did my bereavement work at Gilda's Club in Manhattan. And once I finished my bereavement group after a year, I realized there was still work to be done. I think that's when the hard work starts, when you realize, okay, I'm through the sadness, I'm through the fog, but now I realize I need to learn how to go on my own, how to raise my son on my own, how to live in my apartment on my own, how to walk the dog on my own. So all of that work that comes after the first year, and that's when we started the W Connection in 2009.
Roselyn, tell us a little bit about your story.
My husband, Bob, died in August of 2008, the same year. We were at the beach with my 6-year-old daughter on Labor Day weekend, which was something we did often, down in Point Pleasant, New Jersey. And I was sitting on the beach reading a book, and he'd been playing in the afternoon with our daughter. And I looked up, and they were playing, and I had talked to him about 10 minutes before and asked him to come out to lunch. And he said, no, let us play in the water. So I kind of went back into my book, and about 3 minutes later, I looked up, and my daughter was out in the waves, and he was just floating in the water.
Wow. Oh, my goodness.
So it was kind of one of those horrific scenes where they dragged him out. My daughter was 6 at the time and was there, and he was not revived.
Wow. Did they think he had a heart attack, or
An
they don't
arrhythmia
know?
or a heart attack. We never really figured out exactly what it was, but whatever it was immediate and quick.
Now, did you two know each other then?
No.
So you both lost your husbands very suddenly, and you were both very young. To be widowed all of a sudden.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, you know, Dawn and Ellen, our co-founder, got together, and they started talking about doing the W Connection.
W standing for?
The W standing is very interesting because when we first started the W Connection, we called it the W Project, and we said, you know, we'll name it something later. I think there was a lot of people very uncomfortable with widow. I wasn't uncomfortable with the word widow. I liked it better than single. Single felt more odd to me. So we named it the W Connection because it was that word that nobody wanted to be called. So the W connection is about connection, and the W is for the word.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay.
So kind of simultaneous to Ellen and Dawn, thinking about the W connection, I had been an investment banker my whole career, and I struggled. I felt so vulnerable. I mean, he died suddenly, and the finances, things that I should know how to do, I was completely overwhelmed. And I started thinking about, oh my gosh, how must this be for somebody else? And started thinking about new widows and how vulnerable they must feel, and knowing that the rest of my life I wanted to devote to helping other women. And we ended up meeting coincidentally, the three of us, at my child's grief therapist's office.
Oh, wow.
And
Right.
so tell us what you're doing with the W connection now, what your plans are, hopes, dreams, all that kind of thing.
So we got very good advice early on from another nonprofit, and she said, do what you do well. She goes, and let other nonprofits do what they do well, because you're all working for the same cause. So it was,
I like that so
Yeah, it
much.
was,
Because it's everything about connection now.
yeah, it was really great advice. And our premier service is our chapter meetings, our local chapters. And what we do in our local chapters is we bring widows together. I actually still facilitate the chapter on the Upper West Side. And we bring widows together to talk about topics that they're struggling with. So there could be a topic on grief. There can be a topic on loneliness, a topic on dating, or a topic on expanding their network. It's very similar. You know, sometimes I know I went to Weight Watchers for years, and it's very similar to that Weight Watchers meeting, where you come in, you talk about a topic that you're struggling with, and you walk away with strategies. And some of those strategies the facilitator has, but other strategies come out of the group. So that is our chapter meeting, and again, that's our premier service. And those are run by volunteers who want to start a chapter in their community. And we have 8 right now, with 2 more chapters on the way. We're very excited to be starting a chapter in California, in Northern California.
Where in California?
Northern California, East Bay area. That chapter is starting in March.
Because I live in Palo Alto.
Oh, great, great. We'll be there soon. We'll be there in
And
March.
you've got one here in New York.
We have
Two in
we
New
have
York.
2 here in
We
New
have 2
York.
here? Okay.
Yep, one on the Upper West Side, one on the Upper East Side.
Oh,
We have
3 in
Long Island, New Jersey, and Philadelphia.
Wow.
Okay.
Well, you know what I like that I'm hearing, that you have strategies that you're giving people, so there's takeaways they can take. And I also like the fact that you're talking to the women in the group, the widows, saying, okay, what's worked for you?
Right.
And helping them to come up, put their heads together and come up with strategies for
Right.
people.
Right, we even got a great strategy. We did I did the topic on loneliness the other day, maybe like 3 months ago, and one woman said that I have a strategy. She goes, I'm going to call each and every one of you on Saturday morning, so that when you wake up, you have a phone call that morning. I thought it was a
Wow. I
great
love
strategy.
that.
It was something, you know, hey, I'm here. I'm alive, I'm having a good day, I'm having a bad day. So it was something that came out of just, you know, one of
Right.
the women in the group.
And Roselyn, you were talking about you're in finance. You must be able to give people a lot of help about that.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, the important point I think to bring up is that we're not a bereavement group. We don't like to call ourselves a bereavement group. We're about kind of educating, empowering, and encouraging women, and I think most of all connecting them with each other.
That's
Because I think the power of connecting people that have gone through the same experience is just invaluable.
We're going to talk to you a little bit more in a few minutes, and I know you know Audrey Pellicano, and she's going to be on our show right now. We're going to show a little roll-in about Audrey, and then she has written a book, and she's going to give us some tips for widows, and we're going to find out from you with Audrey a little more about how we can get in touch with you and get your support. So let's
Absolutely.
watch that roll-in.
Widowhood is like a roller coaster ride. You have the highs, you have the dips, and then at the end of the roller coaster where it's coming into the station and you plateau and you feel, okay, I'm good. I got it all under control, and someone says something, a song may play, you find something in a drawer, and right down to the dip you go again. I'm Audrey Pellicano. I'm a grief and health counselor. When I was widowed 21 years ago, there was very little support out there for widowed women. A widow needs to talk to another widow to say, this is what I'm going through. I think I'm going crazy, but in reality, you're not. But society doesn't know how to deal with grief. People have, you know, the best intentions. They really are at a loss. They have no idea what to do for you. And honestly, when you're a new widow, You have no idea. You're in a fog. You're in a foreign country without a map. Everybody else goes back to their life, assuming that you're going back to yours. I recently asked a friend who I met not long after I was widowed and had moved. And I asked her, did you ever have any idea of what I was going through? And she actually paused, and I could see that sense of, I'm so sorry. And she said, you had it all together. You were in control. And I said, you have no idea how I was so not in control. But we wear a mask. Widows wear a mask just to spare everybody else that, that kind of grief. So I think the misconception is that, time heals all wounds. Well, how much time? Part of my mission is actually to increase awareness. Grief is not taboo and it's not contagious. And widows need a hug. In working with me, either one-on-one or in groups, you'll find that you'll not only have my support, but you walk away with tools that you're going to use for the rest of your life. What you need to know as a widow is that you will experience joy once again.
Audrey, it's so great to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
What good advice you have. Now, how long's it been since you've been a widow?
My daughter, my youngest, is now 24, so it's 24 years.
Wow. And how did your husband die?
Actually, Joe was diagnosed with leukemia 6 months after we were married. And the prognosis is about 7.5 years, and it was 7.5 years later when he died.
And it sounds like your daughter was just little, a newborn, was she?
My youngest was 3 months old. I had a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old.
My goodness, wow.
Now, did you become a therapist after that or before?
No, I didn't. It was after that, and it was certainly not planned. I'm a registered nurse
Okay.
and a health educator, and it was actually after Joe's death, and 24 years ago, I mean, you're saying there was nothing there for you. 24 years ago, there was even less. I did go to a group once, and everyone was as old as my mother. So they really couldn't get the, what does a young widow with 4 babies do?
Right.
So I began inviting people over when I heard in the community that their husbands had died. And people would call me, did you hear about so-and-so? And invite them over for coffee, because I found one of the best things for me was to find someone who actually could listen to me.
And understood and was in kind of that same space, because the thing, I worked with 9/11 widows for 10 years in the fire department that had lost husbands in the FDNY in 9/11. And the thing that they said is what I'm hearing today, Heidi, we would go to these widows things and people were 80 and 85 years old.
Right.
And that wasn't us. We were, like you, young women with small children.
Right.
And so we needed to be around other people that kind of were in that life space.
Right.
So you've written a book, 6 Secrets to Surviving Widowhood.
It's an
Great little
ebook that's downloadable on my
Love it.
website. And what I found very early on was that, in addition to talking, was that I really had to learn skills that were going to help
And you've got
me.
some tips for us. So we're going to put
do.
those tips up on the screen, and
good.
you can talk to us a little bit about the tips.
Well, I think one of the things that every woman seems to not do, and even those who, even more so a widow, is take care of yourself. Your thoughts are everywhere. There's so many thoughts. It's what the Buddhists call monkey mind, right? So what I did actually, not long after Joe died, when I found I wasn't getting anywhere because of all these thoughts, was to go back to my meditation practice, which I started when I was a sophomore in college. And that actually grounded me. And it still is my practice. I practice every single morning. It's 15 minutes. And that was one of the first things I went back to. And I began to see how stability and strength was coming back to me. And then I began looking for what other tools that I could develop, even more.
Well, Audrey, I want to say something about the meditation, because a study just came out from Harvard University, and I just read it today, that said that meditation changes our brain and absolutely changes our life. And it sounds like for you that was definitely something that kept you grounded and kept you sane at the beginning.
Yes, and it still does. And it still does.
However, if you've just had a loss, I'll have to say that I found that the monkey mind can be pretty hard to deal with. If you-
It
a little
wasn't-
further down the road.
Right. It wasn't initially that,
Right.
right after Joe died, I was just about learning like everyone, putting one foot in front of the other. But when I did know that there wasn't much out there for me, I had to think, what could I do? And this was what I had. I didn't have to go anywhere to get it either, because it was a tool I had learned. And then, as I said, starting to think of, well, what else did I need? What was I missing? And one of the big things that I rarely hear spoken about is one of the things that widows miss is that touch. And although I had my children to hug, I didn't have my husband to hug me anymore.
Yeah.
And so I looked into that, and I discovered Abhyanga, and that's a technique of self-massage.
Wow.
So I teach women self-massage. And when I do groups, we all, starting at the head, we do a self-massage. And the body really doesn't know who's doing the loving touch.
Even this, I know, and you see babies do
Absolutely.
that. We
Yes.
talk about that
Hugging
sometimes
yourself.
when we do
Yeah.
presentations, don't we, Heidi? Self-hugs.
So that becoming a routine. And I did that every single night. Put my 4 kids to bed, went into my room, and I loved myself by giving myself that kind and loving massage. So I teach that.
I love that idea.
Yeah, it's really, it's a wonderful thing. And developing that nighttime routine, I think bedtime is very difficult when you're going into that big king-size bed alone. And developing a routine, not just watching television or, the news, or although I watched comedies before I would go to bed, so I'd go to bed.
I think the iPads in bed are kind of bad too with that
They are,
light,
I
and you're
agree.
reading, and then you're so tempted, you're going to go to your emails. I'll just do a couple of emails.
Well, the other thing is in watching TV is when you've had an experience, for example, being widowed, all of a sudden you're noticing all the couples in all the
Yes.
shows. You're saying, wait a minute, am I the only one here
Right.
that's a young widow?
Right.
It kind of brings up so much loss all over again.
So I try and help the widows develop a nighttime routine because sleep in bed can be very, very difficult. So it's turn the television off, turn the computer off, and now, time for my nighttime routine, which is going to incorporate the self-massage, which is going to incorporate preparing for the next day, whether it's getting your clothes out, those choices. It's empowering to make the choice. I'll match this with this. May sound simple to someone else, but if you hadn't had the experience, you don't understand that. And then I recommend an eye mask, earplugs, lavender under the pillow, a whole routine, because the body learns. We talk about muscle memory, and there's a whole preparation. So then the body knows the TV goes off, the computer goes off.
And we don't have a drink of wine because our friend Jed Black that we talked to on our radio show said that if you have a glass of wine, you'll wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Very true. Very true. So rather than self-medicate, we self-love.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah,
Yeah, I like that too because I know that with what I've heard widows say is the hardest time of the day can often be at night when the kids are asleep because that's when I used to go talk to my husband, be
Right.
intimate, unwind about the day,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden I'm alone.
Right.
I'm
So you want to
really
look
alone.
forward to that time. And I always did.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the Death Cafes that you did? You were in the New York Times. I think that's why we found out about you originally.
Yeah, we made the front page of the New York Times
And you guys, have you been in the New York Times?
have.
Yeah,
Yes.
too.
Wonderful.
in June of 2013. I actually heard about Death Cafe from a friend of mine, Lizzie Miles, who's a social worker out in Columbus, Ohio. And she had told me she was starting this Death Cafe. And I was like, what is that? So I looked into it, and through my own personal experience, this just rang so true. I like to think of it as a social movement, and it was actually started, the original paper was written by Bernard Creditz, who was a sociologist. And he had this, like a salon type of, get together in Paris, because he felt that Parisians didn't speak about death, they speak about life. And John Underwood, a Buddhist who was in London, read his paper and said, we have to do this because Buddhists talk about impermanence.
Right.
And so when I read it, having gone through with Joe, although he had been diagnosed 6 months after we were married, we never spoke about his death. So Joe died, and I had no idea what he wanted for his children, no idea what he wanted for me. And then the year before Lizzie started it, my dad passed away suddenly. 81, but never had been spoken about his death.
So now where, if people want to go to the Death Cafe, have you guys been to her Death Cafe?
No, they haven't.
Tell us where you can go. Where is
Well,
it?
we're actually holding it now. It's in at a Chinese restaurant, and honestly, we've moved several times. I was at a Le Pond Quotidian, but when I had 75 people show up, they asked me not to come back. I do want to say it's not a support group. It is a place where the subject is death, where we talk about a subject that so often is taboo. Although many of us say, I want to talk to somebody, but I have no one to talk to. And the whole idea is that we sit and it's over coffee and food and dinner, and we make friends, and it's tables of 4 or 5 people. And what we're looking to do is to have the conversation around death move from Death Cafe to our homes. So that death isn't something that is so strange, and then the subsequent grief is something that's never spoken
So
about.
people are talking about their own deaths.
People are talking about their own deaths. People
Okay.
are talking about the changes, the physician-assisted death. How do you want to die?
So kind of like a good death. How to have a good death.
Very much a good death.
Yeah.
And also people do bring their own experience of loss. We've had people who have had near-death experiences, who have had loved ones in some way communicate with them. But it's a place where there's no judgment.
Yeah,
So
I like
tell
that.
me, how can people find you, Audrey? And then I want to make sure we get to these ladies, how they can be found for the W Connection.
My website is wisewidow.com, and you can find me there. Death Cafe, you can find up on Meetup. It's New York City Death Cafe. And on meetup.com, we meet every 3rd Wednesday of the month for dinner and coffee.
All right.
That's great.
And how about you, ladies? How can people find you? You can look in the camera if you want to and tell them.
Well, you can find us at info@wconnection.com is our email. Our website is www.wconnection.org. You can find information about our chapters, and if you'd like to start a chapter in your community, email us. We're happy. I think we're looking to spread into more and more communities.
All right, now give us your best advice to help widows. What would your advice be?
I think when I was
You
first
can look right out there at them and tell
I
them what your
think when
advice
I was
is.
first widowed, no one could convince me that I would ever be happy again. And you will be, and there's hope, and take the help that you can get and need, and there's just, it never goes away, but it gets better.
Nice.
I think whatever you're feeling is normal. It's not a straight path. It's often, there's days that are good, there are days that are bad, there are years that are good, there are years that are bad. So I think just realize what you're doing is right. Grieving is very hard work, and there's support out there now. If you need support, do look for us at wconnection.org.
Find these ladies because you can never talk enough about what your experience has been, and love yourself a lot.
Yeah.
Well, Heidi, I wanted to ask you just quickly, what was your take with the 9/11 widows? One of the things that I think that we've come up with when we've talked about it is they're doing well.
They're doing well, but I think what people need to realize after a loss of a family member and your life partner is that it takes longer than most people realize. And what takes a long time is to transform your life and look at yourself as not part of a partnership, and kind of reinvent yourself, and all of a sudden go, okay, wait a minute, now I am kind of I'm by myself in a way. Even though my husband is forever with me, it's in a different way. So I think the time span is what I learned. It took most of the widows I worked with 7 years to fully feel 100% comfortable in their new skin.
Yeah. So is that you ladies thought too? It takes time?
Yeah, I
Yes.
think there's something
Yes.
very unique about losing your spouse. It's the life you had planned is all of a sudden, rug is pulled out from underneath it. So you do have to recreate yourself.
All right.
I remember saying,
Well, we've got to end the show, sorry.
no, I just remember saying, I know what color was our favorite color. I have no idea what my favorite color is.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for watching our show today, and good luck to you on your journey. And Heidi and I always like to say, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours till you find your own, and God bless.